for you all. So if you want to pull that up on your screen as well, you can. We will be in a space of like writing and taking notes and engaging with the internet. So if you got like an iPhone, maybe have your laptop, or if you have your laptop, have a phone with you. That way you got two screens to work with, if that's helpful. And let me share my screen real quick. Make sure that works okay. All right, excellent. Okay, so welcome to the workshop, Sending Poems Out into the World workshop. My name is Karla Cordero. You can call me Karla. That works just fine too, or Karla. My pronouns are she, her, hers. Again, my Venmo and PayPal are there at your disposal at any time if you feel you can. If not, no problem. I just want your faces here and joining us today. Before we get started in like understanding like what it means to send poems out into the world and whatnot, did anybody want to like screen in or on the chat talk about like what you do know about publishing? Have you ever published before? What has brought you here today? I'm just going to open the screen to anyone that wants to jump in and say hi. And if not, maybe just give like a hand shout out to Daniel and he can get you on the screen.
Hello, my name is Miles, and with that, I only been published once. So proud of that publishing, but more or less, I would say I need help find like better understanding how it's just like where I just like where my poems can have a home or so, or like be able to understand what is a home for my poems.
So thanks for sharing, Miles. We'll cover that today. So some of us might have bodies of work already that exist, and just kind of figuring out what's going to be the best match, the best location for that. So we'll definitely cover that. Anyone else out there want to share what they know about publishing, what has brought you here today? If not, we'll get rolling. Let's see, we got a couple folks on here. Noor, I'm hoping I'm saying that, Noor. I've been an intern and an editor. I keep up with a lot of publishing podcast media, but a lot are fiction focused, and I'd love to learn more about publishing regarding poetry. Awesome. Thanks for tuning in. We got Taylor from Indianapolis. All I know of publishing, other than submitting to different journals and publications, so I guess I mean independent publishing here, are from stories of my friends having worked published by others that have stolen from them. Oh no, I'm excited to learn more. Okay, cool. So I love that more's dropping in the feed. Feel free to just drop more in the feed. Before we go into like now where to submit, how to submit, I want us to jump first into a writing prompt as kind of the motivation to why we submit poems. So our prompt for today is a quote from Dorianne Lux, and she says, "Poems record what it's like to be alive, set down what is passing and irrecoverable." Okay, so your job for maybe the next 5 to 6 minutes, and we'll do a check-in, is I want you to create a list of metaphors or similes. It could be an extended metaphor if you choose to do so, and an extended metaphor is when you create a comparison, but you stay with that comparison that whole time. So if you want to compare your life to a fish in a river, then stay in that river, and that's your extended metaphor. If you want to reinvent multiple metaphors and similes, then just create that list. So your launching phrase is going to be alive is like, or to be alive is to. I gave you an example there. To be alive is like my mother's hands locked in a freezer, right? Because it's kind of a bizarre time. I don't got access to my mama don't got access to me. So I feel like all her delicious home cooking is just still in the freezer at home, right? So we're gonna launch into about 5 minutes. Just create a list in correspondence to Dorianne Lux. To be alive is like. okay? I'm gonna hit a little bit of music in the background. If you're not down with music, that's okay. Just mute yourself. The other side note, anytime if my internet gets weird or the volume gets weird, shoot a message over to the chat or let Daniel know so he can help us out with that, okay? So I'm gonna let y'all launch into 5 minutes of writing. We'll check in 5 minutes, okay? Have fun. We got about a minute left if you want to write down your last line, last thought, last phrase. All right, if y'all want to slowly come back from the page. And if the pen's still moving, that's like awesome. So I'm happy that the pen still wants to move. No, this is a piece you can always return to and continue to develop. Anybody want to spit a line? Like, is there a line you're like, ooh, I like that? Anybody got one? To be alive is like. What y'all got for me? Give a shout out to Daniel if you do want to share anything. If not, you could drop it in the chat. Courtney got being, let's see here. To be alive is watching a rocket land from inside the carrier. Awesome. Thank you, Taylor. I love it.
Rocio, are you trying to share?
Yes.
Oh, go for it, please.
Okay. To be alive is like feeling the colors of a painting drip from my brain to my heart.
Nicely done. Thank you. Courtney said, being alive is like an oxygen tank without a cord. Yes. Nor said, to be alive is to be burdened. Like syphilis climbing up a mountain again and again. To be alive is to make the trek knowing the outcome to savor the fall. Beautifully said. Thank you for sharing. Awesome. All right. So what I want us to think about, oh, we got one more coming in. To be alive is to dance every chance you get, no matter the awkwardness. Yes, love it, Miles. Thank you. Is to feel your fingers getting wrinkly from being in the water too long. I love it. Thank you. Thank you. I love how everything's super image heavy. That's awesome. The reason I wanted us to start with a prompt is I just want to footnote that I'm not an expert. I'm not the all-knowing of publishing, but I have to share with you today are the experiences that I've encountered and the knowledge and resources that were attained on those journeys. So I'm only sharing with you in an hour and 30 minutes just a little bit of the experiences I've been offered. So just know that there's more possibilities and more conversation to be had. But when we think about why we publish, right? Especially now with a pandemic at our hands on how the way we live is evolving, is that we are recording the act of witnessing, right? And so if we're consistently recording our act of witness, right? Recording humanity, and we're only keeping it in our notebooks and we're only keeping it in our Google Docs, we are doing ourselves a disservice, right? And the disservice is maintaining our voices and our cultures and our stories contained in those spaces. So when we can offer them to the world, we are serving a witnessing, a history from the perspective that only you and you can offer. So I invite you today that as we continue to walk through publishing and why we publish and how to publish, I encourage you to like remove the self-doubt and that the power in publishing is this kind of small revolutionary act of like to send your voice out into the world, right, is a powerful thing. So just want you to think about that as we move forward, okay? The next thing I want to cover real quick, I'm gonna just be talking for a bit, but we might have different levels of experts here joining us today. So if y'all got something to say, like, please jump in and share the knowledge. If you're like, I know nothing about this, please jump in and ask questions, and I can help facilitate that the best I can. But I want us to think about first, like, before we jump into like where to submit and how do you do that, I want us to like think about publishing can challenge you to step into uncomfortable and rewarding spaces. So some of you might be coming in from like, oh, I write in my journal, I write in my Google Docs, I've been on slam teams, I hit open mics, I post on my blog or my Instagram or my Facebook. And some of you might feel still a little empty or not challenged enough. And publishing can be an opportunity to kind of fulfill that next level of accomplishment. Keep in mind, I know so many writers who've never published a thing in their whole lives, but they're amazing writers and they're just stoked to just share their work to the world through an open mic. And that's okay too, right? So you don't have to publish. I want to go into the idea of like why we publish. And so again, Dorian Lux talks about that. We hope though that you'll see publishing not as an end in itself, but an icing on the cake, something to celebrate when it happens, but not to the be all end all of writing or what writing is about. So please don't think that publishing is the utmost validation to prove yourself, right? Publishing can do more than that. And so, like Dorian says, let publishing be a space of icing on the cake when it happens. But if you don't got that icing on the cake, that's okay. You got the cake, right? So it's gonna happen. As we kind of walk through that and thinking why we publish, here have been some of the things that I've come into conclusion with that have brought me a lot of joy when I've had publishing opportunities, is that this idea of building community, building familia, that has been one of the most rewarding things of why I published individual poems, right? And so you build community with various folks. In this case, community with editors, you meet other fellow writers that are in the same space of genre writing. You build community outside of your household, your neighborhood, your city. You get to connect with readers internationally. So sometimes you got folks hitting you up from another part of the country saying like, yo, that poem spoke to me. Thank you for writing that. The last part that I had mentioned earlier is also that it creates a voice for those who don't have the platform or the privilege to do so. So when we send poems out into the world and they get accepted, these are stories, poems, people, history, languages that might have never had the privilege or platform to speak, to be alive, right? When I publish a poem about my mom's never gonna get the opportunity to do that by herself, right? No one's gonna record her story. So when we think about the poems we send out or the fiction pieces we send out, think about who gets to live when they're accepted, right? As we move on, again, I just wanted to say, like, don't let publication be the value of measuring your brilliance, right? You're a writer, you're doing that. That's the first step. You're archiving ideas with intent and passion. And that's all you can ask for. And a lot of times people will be like, so what do you do? And you say, oh, I'm a writer. And then the next thing, all the time they'll be like, so are you published? And so there's this stigma that already exists that in order to qualify as a writer, you have to be published, right? But we don't go out saying like, oh, you're a doctor? Have you ever done a surgery before, right? You know what I'm saying? And so eliminating the stigma that publishing is validation for your brilliance. It doesn't do that, but it does do a couple cool things in this idea of building community. And that's the part I love. So the next step that I do want you to think about though is, are you ready to publish poetry? These are just suggestions and ideas that I had to meditate for myself that have been helpful. And so the things I want you to think about is, have you workshopped and revised your own writing, right? Have you been in community, sending your work out, getting feedback and refining those pieces? Do you have a body of work that you feel proud and confident with? I always suggest anywhere between 3 to 6 poems, because packets for submission are always around 3 to 6 poems. If you're talking more about fiction, they're always going to have a word count. A big thing right now in fiction is called microfiction or flash fiction, short word count stories. So that could be anywhere between 100 to 1200 word count. So always read your guidelines carefully, because there's always going to be a poem minimum number submission and a word count for your fiction pieces. The other thing that I think is really important is like, are you emotionally prepared for a rejection letter, right? Because that could happen, and that will most likely happen. And a lot of times in our lives, we are getting through, and this is real stuff, right? We're getting through heartbreak. We're getting through like moments of depression. And if you're getting them rejection letters and you're just not emotionally ready for that, then maybe just wait a bit before you send stuff out. You want to make sure you're in a position of like good mental health, right? But don't let that stop you from submitting. The other thing is that I've learned is like persistence and patience. The 2 P's, super helpful, right? The more you submit, the more returns on what your poems look like, right? Whether it's a rejection or an acceptance. And the patience of a lot of journals can take up anywhere between 6 months to a year to respond back. So don't push sending poems out into the world or your writing into the world off to the side because of fear, right? Start thinking about, well, it's going to take 6 weeks to a year before anyone even looks at it and I hear back, right? Sometimes some journals will offer like, oh, well, if you offer a $3 convenience fee, we can get back to you in 24 to 48 hours. Those are the really cool ones, because then you hear back and it kind of motivates you to like keep going. So know that response time just depends and varies based on who you're submitting to. The last part I want you to think about is methods of organization for meeting deadlines on time, right? Do you have a method to stay organized, right? Do you have a calendar, a spreadsheet, something to kind of keep you organized with like when to submit, what to submit, how to submit, right? We have someone coming through on the chat saying, when rejections happen, do publishers respond with feedback, or is that very rare? That's a great question. It's going to depend on who you're submitting to. I've had a lot of cold rejections where they're like, no, thanks a lot. You know, like they'll just say like, your work didn't fit here. Try submitting again next year, you know, because sometimes they'll say once you submit, wait 6 months before you submit again. It's just like kind of a rule for some of journals. However, some journals are super kind, where they'll say like, yo, this was a dope poem, but right now we're only collecting poems or work under the theme of magical surrealism, right? Do you have any other pieces on this theme? Or they'll say, hey, this was a great poem. If you revise it or rethink these ideas, consider submitting next time. So it's going to depend on who you're submitting to, on what your response looks like, okay? But for the majority, there are always these super like robotic responses that say, thanks for submitting, we appreciate you submitting, look forward to reading your work in the future. That's kind of always the generic phrasing. But again, like I said, sometimes people are real kind and they want to give you a lot of feedback. Also, feel free to follow up. If you get a rejection letter, don't just be like, life's over. Hit them up and say, yo, thank you for the opportunity. I appreciate you getting back to me. Would you happen to have any notes or feedback for the poems I submitted? Look forward to hearing back. You know, you could totally do follow-ups, because sometimes they will take the opportunity to like shed some light to the poems you submitted. So it's going to depend, right? And those are kind of the values and morals and decisions you have to decide as a writer on how you're going to respond and stay persistent. David said, sounds much like other academic journals. Some of them mechanistic responses, others warmer. Yeah, right? So it's going to depend. Yeah, I mean, I've had some academic journals be fairly kind, and I've had some other academic journals just be like, peace, no thank you, right? So it's going to depend who you submit to. But yeah, sometimes it does feel kind of mechanic, kind of robotical, cold responses and you're like, oh man, like I suck. But you don't. It's all about persistence and like continuing to submit. Okay. So as we move forward, if you still have questions, like shoot them over to the chat and I'll cover them. Okay. Now I want to talk about the kinds of publishing opportunities. A lot of times we go from like production, creating poems, revising poems, sharing them at open mics, and then we go straight to like publishing a book, publishing a chapbook. But in between that time, what you could be doing is sending your poems out into the world so you begin to create a readership, an audience, folks that kind of feel your work and like want more of it, right? So by the time you have that book out, you now have like a readership that's kind of hungry to get more than a single poem published in a single journal. So the couple things that exist out there when submitting poems is you have what's called prints. So these are anthologies, journals, and magazines that are an actual hard copy print that you can buy off a bookshelf, on their website, on Amazon. Don't buy from Amazon, support book opportunities are anthologies, journals, and magazines, okay? When it's web, that means that your poems, or again, your fiction pieces, will only be available online on their website. A lot of times publishers will send you a link and say, hey, the new issue is up, feel free to share on social media. That'll always be a web publication, okay? There's other ones called contests, and contests are when they will give you cash prizes, usually first, second, and third. There's always a judge, 1 to 2 judges, so they will filter through your submissions, maybe sometimes choose the top 10, top 20, then forward that over to a judge or more than one judge, and then the judge will then select a first, second, and third, and there's big cash money. So think about, publishing doesn't have a lot of money in the industry for singular poems, but I always say the wealth is the community you built, right? But contests do offer money. So you could get anywhere, gosh, I've seen anywhere between like $3,000, I've seen $20,000 for a single poem, right? But it's gotta be a fire poem. So that's also just something to consider. The other fun ones to submit to are more like the experimental ones, short films, voice recordings. Short films, there's Atticus Review, who take films with poem voiceovers, and Button Poetry also does poetry short films that you can submit. So I've also been a runner-up for one of those, and those are a lot of fun to do, like the small production of what your poem would look like visually into a short film, which is cool. So these are kind of the possibilities that exist out there on like where to submit and what the outcomes are if you choose to do so, okay? Again, if you have any questions, just shoot them over to the chat, and I promise I will stop talking in a bit so we can work on where to submit and how to submit, okay? Here have been the best resources on tracking down where to submit. So to answer, I believe it was Miles who had the question of like where to submit, right? We have a body of work that exists. We have enough work to submit. Where do we start, okay? Step 1, I'm gonna recommend this is the fun part, is like, that's why I always call it like playing detective. Collect all the books you love, right? In this case, mine are poetry books. I love poetry, right? So for instance, if I look at one of my poetry books by one of my favorite authors, Javier Zamora, writers will always have a page at the beginning or at the end of the book called an acknowledgments page. An acknowledgments page is where they offer a thank you to where their poems have been published previously. So if we go to Javier Zamora, he's got an acknowledgments page, right? And here, obviously this is backwards, but I'm just showing you the formatting. We'll show you all the journals they've been published and all the specific poems that were published. And that gives you an idea to track down journals that you love that are publishing poems and poets that you love. And that's where you want to see yourself. So it's all about like finding your tribe, right? What kind of voice, what kind of structure are your poems creating, and where are the spaces, the journals that are accepting those things? So track down your favorite writers, see where they're submitting to, and that's a good place to start. Another favorite writer of mine, he was a mentor for a while, was Willy Perdomo. And so again, he has an acknowledgments page, and I could see everything, every poem he's published and where it's been published. And sometimes I'm gonna track down that journal and say, I might start here, I'm gonna submit there, right? So that might be a cool place for you to start if you like that work, right? And that's kind of where I started. The second idea that I was introduced to later that I loved, it could feel a little overwhelming, but once you know how to navigate, it's great. It's a website called Entropy. So if you click on the link, it'll take you to this website, and I just want to show it to you real quick. Entropy is really cool. It shows you, it's called Where to Submit, and it's labeled by genres, so essays, fiction, reviews, and they kind of put these little articles, and they put a lot of work into this. So it'll have one, for example, these are the ones I like to go to, Where to Submit, March, April, and May 2020 by Justin Green. So I click on that, and what's really cool about this is it lists every journal you can possibly submit to, with links to deadlines, cost, fees, and so forth. And what I like to do is I like to scroll down, and it'll give you presses if you're trying to submit like full manuscripts, and it gives you everything in alphabetical order, which is bananas. Look at all that. So if you can't find anything, go to Entropy. They're fantastic. Keep scrolling, 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 scrolling. Look at all that. You got chapbooks. And so those of you that don't know what chapbooks are, they're smaller versions of a manuscript, usually anywhere between 12 to 20 poems. And they make these beautiful little chapbooks depending on the press, some more homemade, some more visually similar to like a standard book. And then you keep scrolling, scrolling, scrolling. Then here's where you want to start. If you're looking to publish kind of individual poems or a packet of poems, journals and anthologies. Again, this is so cool. It gives you the list of journals, deadlines, and the genre they're looking for. Keep in mind when you submit, sometimes they'll ask you for a submission fee of $3. Seems reasonable. Sometimes those $3 go towards submitting the, supporting the journal in the space. But don't do the ones that ask for like, oh, if you want to submit 2 poems, give me $30, right? I don't think you should be paying that amount for your work as artists, right? We should be we should be getting paid as artists. But if you're willing to offer $3, $5, know it's going to support the journal itself. However, if you're submitting to a full manuscript competition or a chapbook competition, they might have a reading fee. It could be anywhere, I've seen from $10 to $40. Be prepared for that to come up. And again, sometimes those amounts go towards supporting the journal, go towards the manufacturing of a book, or go towards paying the judges. Just a heads up. And sometimes it's just a pocket to continue to support the press or the journal that's publishing the book or the chapbook, okay? Again, if you have any questions, let me know. All right, the second thing that's been really helpful is subscribing to magazines, right? And right now, obviously, we don't have access to bookstores like Barnes & Noble and so forth, but you can go online. And if you don't want to go online, that's okay too. You can also, I think, they can send you, if you jump on their, what's it called? Their mailing list. They'll send you an email of open submission. So one of the places I love looking at, one of the magazines is called Poets and Writers. They're fantastic. They give you a lot of knowledge on like the writing process and so forth. But if you go to the back, they have a section called Classified. Classified gives you all the journals, deadlines, requirements, fees on where to submit and how to submit, and links on the internet. So this is kind of a cool resource if you like something hard copy. and you like to circle and underline and highlight and rip out the pages and post them everywhere, this is kind of a cool resource to use. Okay. Daniel said something about submittable. Generally, the 1 to 5 submission fees pay for the platform. Oh, this is true too. Their pricing tiers changed, submittable, and it became very expensive to keep a free submission option open. This is very true. Thank you, Daniel. Maria said, what does it mean if they ask that it shouldn't be submitted elsewhere or to notify if published elsewhere? Can we submit the same poems to the different places? Should we? Excellent question. Okay, so here's what happens. There is kind of an honor code that we as writers try to honor. And so the honor code goes as follows. If you're submitting the same packet of poems to various journals, which you can, but one journal hits you up and says, hey, we want to publish these poems. It's your job to then contact the other journals and say, hey, my poems were already picked up, but thank you for the consideration, right? Because that's the honor code. You're not supposed to publish one poem that's like fire and then send it to another journal and have them publish it as well. Because journals and magazines are excited to be the first to publish that poem or that fiction piece. So the best way is if you do use Submittable, which we'll talk about in a second, Submittable is kind of a cool place to keep track of that. And you can contact editors through Submittable to say, hey, just a heads up, or you know, thank you so much for your time, but this poem was already picked up, and yada, yada, yada. And that kind of informs them. You can also, through Submittable, pull poems out and remove them from the submission pile. So that's kind of another option as well. So I hope that answers all of your questions. Can we submit to the same poem? Yes, you can. And should we? Yeah, I do it all the time. I'll put a packet of 3 to 5 poems and send them to 5 journals and see who gets back to me sooner. In some circumstances, you'll have 2 journals hitting you up and saying, I love your poems. And so now you have to make the decision who you're going to say yes. Okay.
Looks like Karla froze up here. Give her a minute to get back going.
Sorry, gang, we got disconnected apparently.
No worries.
Welcome back. Okay, so we got a few folks in the chat while we get settled again. All good, happens to the best of us, thanks. You're breaking up, didn't hear the last part. I will cover that. Yes, what would be some not so obvious factors to consider? Okay, cool. If you could clarify what you meant by that, that'd be helpful. But real quick, the last thing I was talking about was if Daniel, maybe as a publisher, you can give some insight on how Notacult uses their submission reading fee, like where does that money go to? Or from your previous experience, what have other publishers used that submission fee for manuscripts or chapbooks?
Totally. I'm gonna, oh yeah, they repeated the question that I think you may have missed, which we can circle back to.
Yes.
For the Notacult submissions using Submittable, I'd kind of touch base on this in the chat, where the way that Submittable now bills people that are running those platforms, it costs like into the 4 figures now to handle any submissions that are like, if you're taking in over 100 submissions. And so our submission fee was like $2 and a purchased book within that year from the Notacult catalog, which is something that I see a lot of independent publishers doing, where it's just, hey, if you want to submit for publication consideration, buy a book. So that usually maths out to like $13, $15. And we do that to encourage people to kind of get a sense of the press. If they're publishing to us, they can see previous work that was made, and they get a book, and then it also, you know, helps circulation for our titles as well. So yeah, that's primarily the thing, because we also have a judging panel of 4 people usually per category, and we pay them each a stipend, and so usually all of the money that is generated from the submission competition goes back to the judges, who are an array of editors or authors, and go back into paying for the platform itself.
Mm-hmm. Awesome, thanks, Daniel. And then could everybody still hear me okay? Because my screen's saying unstable internet. Okay, good, if you could hear me, great, awesome. So yeah, that's something to think about. That's one of my favorite things of why I've been attracted to independent presses, is that they're very mindful regarding financial stability for us writers, us artists, right? Us starving artists. We don't have a whole lot of money to be sending out to multiple submissions. And my favorite part is when some of that submission money goes to getting a book, right? You feel good because you submitted a manuscript, and you also get a book at the end of the day, which is kind of cool. There's a cool journal called Rattle. They're fantastic. And Rattle, when you submit poems, they also give you a membership subscription. So you'll get like 3 or 5 issues a year. And that's super rewarding because you paid to get a bunch of books of poems that you can read from a journal you love, in case you do or don't get the acceptance, right? So other things to think about. Going back to Belem's question on worst case, awesome case scenario, is that you have 2 journals simultaneously saying, we love your poems, can we publish them? How do you decide? I don't know. You go with your gut, right? And so a lot of times I'll go revisit the journals, see who they've published. If they just published a poet I love, you know, I want to be part of that community and part of that conversation. Sometimes I study the editors, or what's called the masthead, the staff who are reading these poems and accepting these poems. And in some instances, these are writers that I've loved and admired my whole life, right? And so I want to say yes to these folks because these are poets or writers I love, and they just said, yes, we want to publish your work. So yes, take the poem, right? But again, you find your value system on how to decide. Those have been kind of the ways I've thought about where to say yes to poems. Also, be completely okay saying no to publishers, right? Sometimes I've had instances where people say yes to a poem, but they'll say, can you change all the Spanish words to English? Can you back to them? They hadn't heard in like a year and a half about what the book was going to look like, right? Yeah, hashtag integrity, right? And so you're allowed to kindly go back and say, hey, you know what, after thinking about this thoroughly, because you haven't signed a contract yet, if you're thinking chapbook and manuscript, I'm going to pull the manuscript out because I don't think it's going to be a good fit, you know, but use your kind words. But you have the power and voice to say that, okay? Because you might run into those instances. Someone says, it froze on my end right after the Spanish to English comment. Oh, okay. Just to repeat that there might be instances when you get a poem accepted or a chapbook accepted or a manuscript accepted that it's okay to not accept. Some of those instances might be where they want to say, hey, can you change those Spanish words to English? Or can you rephrase this part? In other words, if an editor is asking you to change the authenticity of your voice, you are allowed to kindly decline, okay? The other thing is if your editor or your publisher or the journal is horrible at communication, you have no what, I haven't signed a contract yet. I'm gonna kindly remove these poems from this space, right? So know you have a voice and say in that if you don't feel comfortable on how things are rolling through when talking about a manuscript or chapbook, okay? And I'd be happy to answer more questions on that if you do. To jump back into the document, right? The last thing I want to offer to you as a resource is Submittable. Some of you might have never heard of Submittable. Some of you already have a Submittable. What's really cool about that, and I'll show you some of the features, is if you click on the link, okay, I also offered on the Google Doc the steps on how to use and make an account. So if you haven't done that, I'm gonna show you real quick. Let me just get to my Submittable page. Okay, here we go. It's gonna look a little something like this. They kind of revamped the page, so it looks a little different. But all you have to do is make an account, sign up. I believe, is it still free, Daniel, to make an account?
I believe so. Yeah, I think for people that are submitting, I don't think there's any costs associated with those folks.
Okay, cool. And so when you make an account,
Oh no, Karla.
can you hear me?
You're back.
Hey, I'm back. I'm so sorry, gang. I don't know what's going on with the internet.
It's all good.
Okay, where did I leave off? What'd y'all hear last?
I think it was right at the top of you showing this walkthrough through Submittable.
Okay, cool. Okay, one of my favorite features once you make your account on Submittable, okay, is you can click on Discover. When you click on Discover, it'll take you back to this page I had it on. Internet's a little slow. That's okay. We're gonna get there. Bang. Okay, it's gonna have this little search engine, which is my favorite, and you can filter through like, I don't want to pay anything, deadlines, no deadlines. And so we can literally just start with going poetry. I want to submit some poetry out into the world. And so when you click that, it'll filter through on the bottom a couple options. This is always my favorite part, no deadlines, it's year round. And so it'll filter through with the journals, what they're looking for, and if there is a submission fee, right? Or if you want to be a little more like, I need dates, dates help me, then it's kind of filtered through Wednesday, May 13th. And then again, it gives you some of the details here. Here it'll tell you in 2 hours, and some folks are literally rushing 2 hours to like format everything. Thursday, May 14th. And so as you kind of go down, you can see your journals, what they're looking for, and cost for submission. So just know that's there for you, okay? Let me see, I think someone kind of shot a question over. From Cassandra, is there anything legal-wise that we should consider when on our journey dealing with publishers, etc.? I think if you're talking about singular poems or a packet of poems going to journals or magazines, I think legal-wise, as long as they put, which all journals do, they post your bio, your name, and that it was published by you, right? That's kind of important for copyright issues. The other thing I've seen, and again, this is just kind of honor system, is maybe someone snatching your poem and posting it on social media without giving you credit, right? And that's the only thing I could think of. If we're talking about legal issues for a chapbook or manuscript, most of the time there's always going to be a contract that your editor or your publisher will create. And then they send you that document and they give you some time to review the contract, I always recommend read the contract, highlight things you don't understand, because a lot of times we've never looked at a contract before, and sometimes we don't know the language. So do your homework, have conversations with your publisher and say, hey, what does this mean? What does this mean? What do you mean by this? Can you clarify this? And I say, hey, I got this contract, like, what do you think? So always have community around like writing poetry, workshopping, and then your contracts as well. And I think that's all I can think of regarding legal stuff, but if anything else comes to mind, I'll let you know. Further down, someone said, do publications accept poems that they don't think are 100% ready to be published, but want to work with the writer to polish? Should we anticipate having our pieces altered, however drastically, before seeing them online or on the page? Most of the time, my words of wisdom is make sure your poem's polished and ready to go. Editors, magazines, journals don't want to be working with you to polish a poem, because they're working on reading poems for the next issue, to format, to set up, and then to market and to share on social media. So they most likely don't have time to help you polish a poem. This is why it's important for you to build a community where you can send your poems, or again, your fiction pieces, and get feedback, polish them the best you can, or you're tired of looking at it, you don't know what else to do with it, send it out, see what happens, right? Sometimes though, I've had a friend send poems out and the editor was super kind and would say like, hey, if you can clarify like some of the abstractions on this metaphor, consider submitting next issue. And she did, and the poem got accepted. So there will be editors that are kind enough to do that, but for the majority, not really. Make sure your poems are polished. Editors look for spelling issues, grammar issues, like, yo, if you want this poem published, it's got to be polished, right? All the P's, think about that. Poem, publish, polish, right? So just make sure it's real clean looking, and you're sending your best work. Always think of sending your poems or your fiction pieces out into the world like a resume, right? However it looks, that's speaking to the kind of writer you are regarding editing, revision, formatting, and so forth, okay? Daniel said that NAC's editing process is generally working off something that's pretty close to done, and a great deal of the editing work goes into making sure the focus of the work is clear and the collection is cohesive. Yes, super true. So sometimes if they're putting an anthology together, an anthology is a book. I have an anthology right here that's super magnificent, the Breakbeat Anthology, Latinx. I remember working with these folks and they made a few, like the poems for me were done, but they did make some small grammatical suggestions regarding like tense. And I was like, cool, I didn't notice that, I'm with it. And so they'll polish, like as Daniel had said, some final close to done pieces, because as a whole, it works beautifully, right? But they'll make some small tweaking suggestions as such. Someone else said, do some of these publications on Submittable only take work from a specific geographical location? Would the Hawaii review take something from Australia? Awesome question. I don't know the answer to that. You would have to click on the journal, which I can do real quick, and we'll do that in a second, and read their guidelines carefully. A lot of times guidelines overwhelm us and we get super high anxiety, and then we skip all of that and then just submit the poem and we're like, we're done, but we didn't read the guidelines, right? It's going to depend on the journal. Sometimes the journals are only for women. Sometimes the journals are only for non-binary. Sometimes the journals are only from the perspective of the African-American experience, from undocumented folks, from refugees. So, I mean, if you're submitting a poem and you're not undocumented or you don't identify as a refugee, then your poems might not be a good fit there, right? So again, just read the guidelines carefully. It's never bad to ask and to send the publisher or the journal or the magazine a question like, hey, question, I notice this is the Hawaii review, but do you accept poems from Australia, right? Domestic, so within the country itself. that live in Minnesota. And that might be it. Did I get everyone's questions? Yes. Okay, so let's move on. All right. And we're doing great timing, so everybody, thanks for hanging in there. I want to cover the materials we need for submitting poems, and here's where I'm going to be talking less and having you write more. So the checklist before you submit your fiction or poetry out into the world is as follows. You need a cover letter, which I'll show you samples, a short bio. You need to put a packet of 3 to 5 poems together, or if you're in the fiction realm, keep track of your word count, and if it's honoring the theme that they're looking, and then pay attention to your submission guidelines again, or you'll be rejected. So one time I submitted somewhere and they said, don't put your name anywhere. I didn't pay attention because I was in a hurry. I put my name and then they rejected the poem, right? And so I submitted the same poem again, next issue, no name. They accepted the poem, right? And so read your guidelines carefully, right? We're gonna use some time now. Oh, last part. Just make sure, just know that it was a successful submission, that when you send poems out, you will get a confirmation email in your inbox. It's really important when you make your submittable account that it's through an email that you're consistently checking, okay? If it's like a Hotmail you haven't touched in like 10 years, don't put that email, right? The other thing is sometimes if they're not using submittable, they might want mailed copies of your poem, which is more traditional, old school. Make sure you have updated information on there so they can contact you. Email, phone number, mailing address, yada, yada, okay? So I want to give us a few minutes. I just want you to write this down. If not, just keep it with you. Maybe this part will just kind of keep here. I don't think you need to write here so much. But your cover letter, the key is just short, simple, clear. Don't give your whole life story. They don't want your whole life story, okay? So this is kind of a template, but you can kind of format it into your own, right? So your first is an address to the editor or to the publisher. You can even use their names, to the Freeze Ray editors and staff, and then your address, right? Please consider the attached poems for publication. After reading the work of previous authors, you can even name drop a couple authors that you really love, that you read from, inspired to submit. Thank you for your time, consideration, Ron Burgundy, whatever, right? And so this is kind of a real nice, simple cover letter. It doesn't need to be anything extravagant unless your chapbook or manuscript is asking for a statement of purpose on like who you are, how you're going to market the book, have you been published before, what are your awards. Sometimes they'll ask for that, so just a heads up, okay? What I want to give us time to do right now is sometimes when you, most of the time when you submit your poems or your fiction pieces, oh, shout out to Freeze, I love Freeze Ray, they're amazing, is you are going to be asked to submit a short bio. Okay, so I've given some samples here, and some of you might say, well, how do I write a bio if I've never been published? That's okay, that's perfectly okay. So if you look at the second one for Batman, Batman lives in New York, is working as a social worker for a nonprofit called Saving Pockets. They love cats, tortillas, finding love in the wrong places, follow work at Batcave. That's fun, I learned a lot, right? But if you have been published, it doesn't hurt to name drop it, right? Wonder Woman is a poet, jazz vocalist, right? And then we go further down. Her work has appeared in Forthcoming, Alliteration Room, and so forth. You can even talk about your education if you're currently working on that. Is currently studying comparative literature at Stanford University, right? Why not? Add it, okay? So we're going to work on bios for maybe about 5 minutes. Just if you've never done one before, try it. And here's the crazy thing. Sometimes culturally, we've been taught never to talk about ourselves. So bios are the weirdest things to write because it feels like you're just like, you know, like super ego. But it's okay to honor the labor that you put in to be at this point, right? So I'm gonna give y'all 5 minutes. First step, start with your name, right? And then talk in the third person. Third person meaning you're not saying I. So you don't say, Karla Cordero, I'm a poet. I'm a jazz vocalist. Speak in third person, right? It's always helpful narration-wise. So I'm gonna give y'all 5 minutes. I'm gonna put a little music on, and then I'll check in and see how we're doing with our bios, okay? So good luck. Go for it. Try it. Also, if you have written a bio, right now is a good time to revise it or to pare it down or to update it. All right, we got about a minute left. We'll do a check-in in a minute. All right, you want to slowly come back. Again, your bio doesn't need to be complete. But what's really nice about this workshop is sometimes we have self-doubt, and sometimes preparing our creative writing to submit out into the world is kind of scary when you do it by yourself. So I always like workshops because it forces me to sit down for an hour and 30 minutes and accomplish something, whether it be listening on how to do this thing or whether it be like, yo, I wrote a bio today, 50 words, nice, you know? And so bios normally for journal entry, or not, excuse me, not journal entry, for journals or magazine submissions, they'll usually give you a word count anywhere between 50 to 100 words. Or sometimes they'll just say the phrase short bio, right? So honor that. Let me lower the music real quick. Honor that, and don't be sending in your whole life story. I'm sure your life story is super important and real fascinating, but for editors, they just want to get there quick. Like, what's your name? What do you do? Where have you been published? Or what do you enjoy in life, right? Because what ends up happening is if your poem or fiction piece gets accepted, then when they publish it, at the very bottom is where your bio is going to be located. So your bio then becomes this worldwide accessible bio that is forever attached to your poem. So revise your bios as well, right? Some people like to identify their pronouns or identity or race, ethnicity, or where they're from in their bios. If that's important to you, do that. Someone had talked about before, can I mention non-writing awards that I was awarded that are not in connection to writing? If it is important to the person you are, mention the award, right? Award, because that says a lot to who you are as a person. Maria said, if your bio, do you mention being Latina or no? It is up to you. For me, in my bio, if you go to my website, karlacordero.com, I always make it an importance to mention that Karla Cordero is a Chicana, is a descendant of the tribe of the Chichimeca people from northern Mexico, because for me in that bio, that honors the ancestors that came before me, that have given me this body and the voice to create, you know? So that's kind of my philosophy. I like to honor my identity and my ancestors, and then I go into like my awards or fellowships or what I do and so forth, right? So it's up to you. It's really up to you. Okay, cool. Thanks, Maria. Did anybody want to share their bio? Anybody interested? Anybody interested? Anyone brave? No? Maybe? Okay, cool. Michael. Let's see. Michael, they, them. Okay, thank you. Michael Weber is a nonprofit worker, a cruciverbalist. I'm not familiar with that word, so my apologies. If you want to jump on and read it, you'd probably do a better job than me. And a maybe aspiring minister living in Philadelphia. They hope to successfully grow vegetables in a backyard garden and write songs on the piano or guitar. Follow their music reviews, playlists, and poems at, and then the website. I think that was beautifully done. I learned so much about you. Applause. That was great. Thank you, thank you, thank you. I love that so much. The other cool thing that some folks like to do at the end of their bio, which I like to do, is I'll put, you can follow their work, and then put like your IG account or your website, because maybe people do genuinely have a connection to your poem and they want to reach out and say, yo, where can I get more of your work? Or they want to continue to follow your work. And sometimes dropping your IG or your website is kind of a cool way to connect with people. Okay, so thanks for doing that. Anybody else want to share their short bio? I'm here to listen. If not, we can move on. You can drop it in the chat or feel free. Daniel can unmute you and you can jump in. Why? Because I've been doing a lot of talking. This is my third Zoom today, gang. Who's jumping on? Rocio, you gonna do it?
Okay. Rocio Franco lives in Chicago working as a health insurance counselor at a nonprofit union health fund called SCIU Local 4. She loves exploring the city with her husband and daughter, practicing Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and approaches the world with a social justice lens.
Hey, now that's a bio. I want to be best friends with Rocio. I want to read Rocio's work now. Thank you, Rocio. You even got claps, and you got little hearts going out. I love it. I love it. Like, look at the people we get to learn, like beyond the poem when we read it, right? Is that this person is amazing. Thank you, Rocio. Did anybody else want to read their bio? Oh, okay, Nor, and again, Nor, if you want to jump on, I don't even know if I'm pronouncing and honoring your name correctly. So if you want to jump in and do that for me, please feel free. If not, I can read it. Pakistani American woman who graduated from North Carolina State University in 2018. She currently works on freelance writing projects and interns at a Durham-based nonprofit. Most recently, her writing has appeared in Walter magazine. She can be found on Twitter, blah, 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 and Instagram, or Awesome. I love it. I love it, love it, love it, love it, love it. You might want to consider just putting one social media tab, maybe no more than 2, so you don't overwhelm people with like, look at where you can find me, right? Maybe just choose 1 or 2 of the social media platforms that you're most present in, or maybe the platforms where you're posting a lot of your work might be cool. But aside from that, fantastic. I want to know you. I want to be your best friend. I wish I could hear your voice, but that's okay. Thank you for sharing. David said, and again, folks, I'm so sorry if I don't say your names correctly. Like, I want to honor that, but if y'all ain't jumping in, I'll just read. David is passionate about helping individuals, families, and organizations thrive. As a speaker, writer, poet, consultant, and trainer, David brings together a unique fusion of experience ranging from business to leadership, emotional health, and spiritual development. David and wife, Natalie. David, maybe David and his wife, if that's your pronoun, and his wife, Natalie, have 3 children and live on the Sunshine Coast in Queensland, Australia. He holds a degree in organizational leadership and is currently working towards a PhD. Okay, David, specializing in organizational management. Dave's active blog is Awesome. I'm loving it. Thank you, David, for sharing. This is another cool person I want to know. Awesome, awesome, awesome. I would maybe only suggest, David, where you say as a speaker, writer, and poet. Maybe like speaker, do you mean like a motivational speaker?
Yeah, that kind of thing.
David, you have a face. Hi, David.
Hey.
Okay, yeah, I think, yeah, if you say, maybe say motivational speaker, because that'll kind of paint a picture of the kind of speaker you are. Is passionate about helping individuals, family. Yeah, this is great, David. I love it. Awesome job.
Thanks.
All right. What about name? Should we use our full name? Maria, it's up to you. Whatever honors your identity, do it. When people ask me about pseudonames or anonymous names, there's pros and cons to that. I don't have a lot to say, but I always just say, like, stay authentic to who you are. Your name is just as important as your piece. It is who you are, but that's your choice. So if you want to honor your full name, put your full name. If you go, some poets have like a poet name they go by, then just write that if that's what you feel comfortable with, okay? Some folks said, you are pronouncing it correctly. Don't worry. Also, thank you for the special media tip. You're welcome, Nora. You're so welcome. I'm happy I'm saying that correctly. Daniel, definitely use full name that you want to be building your publishing work canon around. Yes, Daniel has a good point, because what ends up happening that I've seen some writers do is they do create like these pseudonames or poet names, which is fine. But then what ends up happening is if you build a following on that particular name, and then you come out with a new project and you change it over to your full name, then you could lose some of your followers or your readership, because they're like, was it the same person? I don't know, right? So Daniel makes a good point. Alexa said, if we are including that we are studying at a university, should we name the university, or does it really matter? I think if you're going to say you're at a university, I would say which one, because maybe you can build some connection with folks that way. I'm majoring in English and want to mention that to publishers, but I am unsure if I would or shouldn't include my university name. I mean, I would, some of for example, the sample bio says she is currently studying comparative literature at Stanford University. Again, that kind of bridges the connection on like what your educational background and career is working towards and where you're located. And that could, again, build connections to people. An editor could be like, oh, I know the so-and-so at Stanford for the magazine. That's cool. So the more you ground that, the more likely you can have connections, okay? Daniel's like, go for it, Maria. Yes, I agree. Also, do we have to include a social media if we do not publish any poetry to things such as our social media? It's up to you. Maybe Daniel can talk on that, but for me, I liked social media because I like connecting with people, and I want people to send their work my way, and I want to create a place where people can still access my work and what I'm doing in the community, because I'm always in the community doing stuff. But I don't know, Daniel, what are your thoughts? Do you think it's super important for people to have like a social media page for their work, or not really? What do you got to say?
It's a good question. I mean, very similar to what you're already suggesting. It's like, point back to whatever is most relevant for your work. Like if you're not using social media in that way, then like if it's just a personal page, like speaking for myself, I would not include like my own personal handles on a bio. I would point it rather to my website or nothing at all. I think it is good to have a place where people can find like a centralized hub that you control that represents your work, be it a website or social media handle. Yeah, that's my take on it.
Awesome. Thanks, Daniel. Yeah, so it's up to you. Again, why are you putting it there to begin with, And so for me, I just use it to connect with people. For Daniel, he doesn't, because he'd prefer like the website, like a more professional access. So it's up to you. The other thing someone mentioned is, speaking of the university question, I mentioned that I graduated in 2018, but is there a point where it's been too long and you shouldn't mention it? It's up to you. For me, I have a master's in creative writing with an emphasis in social justice and so forth, right? And I got my degree in like 2016, whatever, right? I don't mention it in my bio because I already substitute that with the information that I teach at a college. So that kind of already speaks to that I have some kind of credential that suggests I have like a master's. So it's all about like filtering through what you think is important for people to know. The other thing, I always think of short bios as kind of thesis statements, if you're familiar with that phrasing. A thesis statement is 1 to 2 sentences of like what your whole essay is about. So if you can talk about yourself, kind of like an elevator pitch also when you're pitching an idea to a publisher, is like, what's the elevator pitch for me as the author? Like, how do I pitch myself to you? For you to know who I am as a human being, my accomplishments, my interests. And so it's about filtering the most important elements of who you are. It's super hard because we're all interesting people, right? We have so much to say, but maybe choose the ones that, are important to you. Emma said, if you don't want to use a social media, I suggest getting a page. Yeah, it's free and based on indie writers. Yeah, absolutely, right? So I like to use Squarespace. Squarespace has been really great in managing, organizing bios and contact pages and like my calendar. So you can even go with Emma's suggestion on finding a website that helps you stay organized in who you are and what you do. And that's kind of cool too, to make that accessible. And if more questions come up, let me know. Daniel, if it's okay, we'll just go over the 7:30 marker just by
Absolutely.
a little dash, okay?
Yeah, no problem.
My last comment before I go into closing words is, for me, what's been really helpful is this idea of staying organized, because when I say organized, it helps me be motivated to stay on top of sending out my work. A lot of times we're like super inspired, like this was a dope workshop, I can't wait, and then 3 days go by, and then 1 week goes by, and then nothing's happened, right? And so again, the two elements is staying organized and having community that motivates you. Maybe you want to hit up 2 of your friends that are writers and be like, hey, let's have a submitting day for 30 minutes. Let's submit some work together. And you're all around Zoom, making it happen, conquering the world. That's cool too. So for me, I'm a traditionalist for staying organized. I love paper calendars. This isn't filled out because I'm going to show you why it's not filled out, but this has been my go-to, where I go into submittable, I go into entropy, I go into my classifieds in my Poets and Writers magazine, and then I write all of my deadlines. I even put the deadlines 2 to 3 days before the actual deadline, because I trick myself to submitting early. It's always good to do that. The thing I have fallen in love with is what's called the Passion Planner. It looks super ugly right now, but the Passion Planner, as cheesy as it sounds, I put all my submissions, my deadlines, it gives you calendars, so I put everything on when I'm submitting, how I'm submitting, and so forth, and so it keeps track in one whole book of one whole year. And it's kind of cool to go back to see everywhere you've submitted, and I like to even keep track of everywhere I've submitted. See, those are all my submissions. Everywhere I submitted, how much I paid for the submission, so I could keep track on how much money I'm investing into that work. It's kind of cool. I like the Passion Planner. Belen was like, I love the Passion Planner. Me too. All right. As we move further down, okay, my final words of wisdom is come from some of the women that have been super impactful in my life. Sylvia Plath. She says, and by the way, everything in life is writable about if you have the outgoing guts to do it and the imagination to improvise. The worst enemy to creativity is self-doubt, okay? So when you get scared to submit because of rejection, you have to overcome that hurdle. It's okay, it's really important to be uncomfortable in a safe way, because that discomfort gets you into a space of success. Like the more we face fear, the easier it is to go into the next scary thing and the next scary thing. Gwendolyn Brooks says, when you are young, the closeness of other people all trying together to achieve, all sometimes failing, all sometimes triumphing, can be gratifying. When you're submitting, do it in a community. When we do it together and fail together, we will succeed together. And that's why these workshops are so important, because we're building community on these conversations. One particular resource, it's for women and non-binary folks. I think they're a nonprofit. They're called Women Who Submit. And if you click on that, it's a link that will then direct you to different communities under this organization that is closest to you. And they have different events where they get together, in this case, maybe on Zoom. And it kind of forces you to sit down and meet a lot of folks, maybe on Zoom, and then you'll spend 1 hour submitting and then talking about that and getting feedback on cover letters and which poems to submit. Someone said, if you don't mind, oh wait, no, we talked about that. Can you give a few tips about forming a CV before closing out too? Sorry, I know it's a late question. No, that's okay. And before I move on, if you were more interested on like, just tell me where to submit, I want to know, like, we can continue this conversation. Hit me up on my IG, and I actually have the list of the journals that have ever accepted my work, or like the first journals that accepted my work ever, and they were great. And so I'd be happy to share that. Just hit me up on my IG and I could send that to you. The other thing for bios, if you need more brainstorming, I'm just thinking of things I'm forgetting, go to the back of your favorite writers and see how they're writing their bios. That also might give you some motivation or ideas on how to do it. Let's see, so CVs. It depends on where you're submitting your CV to. I have written CVs to residencies, and to workshops. Residencies are when nonprofits or organizations or universities will pay you to go write in that space. They'll have like a cottage or a studio, anywhere between a week to 3 months to 2 years. It's kind of awesome. And when they're trying to select the artists that get to study at the residency, they want a CV. So most of the time my CV is going to be chiseled into everything focused on writing, right? And so you want to think about CVs being clear, organized by sections, and bold, right? And so CVs, again, we can talk more. Who is this? Linda. Depending on where you're submitting your CV to, that's how you're going to organize it. Again, CV is pretty standard. If you Google it, it's like your name, your contact information. It's going to be your academic achievements regarding your bachelor's, master's, PhD, certificates. It's going to be your experience in that field, so a list of that. And then a lot of times if we're talking about like teaching or literature or education, they're going to want to look at like the presentations you've given, the conferences you've attended, the professional development you've participated or facilitated, your awards and scholarships that you've been given because you are a writer, the community service, that's kind of a really important one. They want to see what you, not that you're just a dope writer, but are you doing work in the community with your passion, right? And so I make sure that I outline and highlight the community work I do, right? I've created and worked for a nonprofit. I invest my time in workshops for folks that are undocumented, yada, 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 right? And so at the end of that, also put your references, people that know your writing and know the work you do in the community, okay? So if you're gonna put a professor, make sure you balance that out with a community organizer. So your references are also really important on how you strategize the layout of that, okay? I hope that helped, Linda. If not, find me on IG and I can give you some more information, okay? As we scroll down, the last thing is what happens if you get accepted. I just said yay, celebrate. What you do want to do is don't wait. Do not wait, okay? Send an email reply to your editor expressing your excitement. What could happen is they may ask you to finalize your bio, send any final updates or edits to your poem, and they might ask you for an author photo. My only suggestion on author photos is the best is always like a chest to face, and be mindful of your background and be mindful of just the space, right? You want to honor your space. So you don't want to take a photo in the bathroom with the toilet. You know what I'm saying? Like choose an author's bio that is kind of neutral. You don't have too much going on where it's like, where's their face? I just see a bunch of graffiti, you know? So it's all about balance for photos. And then I also said in the future, update your bio, include your publication and other accomplishments. So if you get that first accomplishment, awesome, you can now add it to your bio, which is kind of cool, right? Last but not least, the importance that I talked about is it's all about staying connected. So if you have any questions, if you encounter a rejection, an acceptance, let me know on IG. I want to know about it. I want to celebrate. I want to share it on my social media. So know that. The other free things I have going on is one, on my Instagram for the next 2 weeks, I've been offering free book giveaways, copies of my poetry book, which is also in collaboration with local Latinx, Chicanx artists. So I might raffle a poetry book with some dope earrings, right? So I have that happening right now. There is a raffle open and it closes on Saturday if y'all want to jump in on that. And then I'm also offering, which was in honor of National Poetry Month in April, a free PDF of my first chat book, Grasshoppers Before God. So if y'all want to get access to that as well, click on the link and you'll get a PDF of my first chat book of like my first beginning days as a poet, right? But yeah, check that out. And I just wanted to offer that as a thank you for showing up today. The fun parts are making the poems and reading poems and feeling inspired. But sometimes the dreadful parts is like putting it together, knowing where to start. And sometimes we don't come from academic backgrounds that teach us those things. I was never taught those things. And so it's really nice that I get to come back and like share that with you, because I wish I knew this years ago, right? Before we close out, one last thing, words of wisdom, thinking about Miles' question, is when you do use Submittable and you hit discovery and you find a journal, the last thing I want to offer you is, oh, I can't find it. Let's say you want to submit to this journal, all right? 101 journal. Make sure you spend some time looking at two things, aside from reading the guidelines, all right? Read their latest issue, because that's going to inform you on who they're publishing. Do you recognize the names? Is it experimental? Are they looking for environmental poems about trees? Do they want social justice poems? Do they like everything? Do they, you know, read their issue, study their issue. The second most important part is go to their about, and it's always really helpful to get their mission statement. It's always helpful to know their staff. And this is really nice. I've never seen this before on a journal. Equity statement, values, and strategic plan, and study who their staff is. Like how many people of color are being represented in reading your poems or your creative work. How many of them are students? How many of them are published, right? And so it's super important to kind of take a look at who you're submitting your poems to. Don't just like throw it into the universe. Know who's reading it. It's always important. And then if it catches my interest, I'll Google the editor, maybe read a poem or two from them. And it's just kind of cool. It gives you a little more understanding of who you're submitting to. So do that work, okay? Final thoughts in 2 to 3 minutes. Does anybody have any closing questions, comments before we get out of here today? And I'm offering you a happy dance at the end because y'all showed up, y'all listened, because I know it wasn't as generative, but it's a lot of good information on stuff we don't know sometimes, right? Any final questions? Final questions. Thanks, Daniel and Karla, echoing that this was all super helpful. I'm so happy, I'm so happy. And again, if you get run into like issues, just email me, hit me up on IG. I'm always here as a resource forever. Elizabeth, you are really and truly an MVP. Thank you. I love it, love it, love it. Alexis, thank you so much for this wonderful workshop. It really helped me in my process towards looking into hopefully publishing my work. Yes, and tell me when you get your first poem published. I want to know. David, this was so good. I learned so much. I'm so happy. Elizabeth, heart, heart, and a heart. So grateful. Thank you, Maria. All right, gang. Well, if there are no questions, I'm going to hand it over to Daniel. Daniel, as always, it is a pleasure to see your beautiful face. Thank you for facilitating this. Please continue to support the artists at Not a Cult. We will be having a workshop with, Daniel will talk more, but Jessica is up, and I will be joining the Sonnets workshop on Friday. So super exciting. I'll have Daniel jump on here and talk about those things before we get out. So Daniel, thank you so much. I appreciate you.
Yeah, likewise, Karla. That was wonderful. Thank you so much for your time tonight. As Karla was mentioning, we have continuous rolling programming that is happening pretty much Monday through Friday. We're going to be continuing to be doing these workshops probably well into the summer now. I recently read that Los Angeles's stay-at-home measures will be in effect through July. So I will be continuing this for sure. There's been now over 3,000 participants in these workshops, which really blows my mind and is incredibly encouraging to see. And I'm seeing a lot of familiar faces. And so thank you so much for participating in these. Thank you so much for sending money to the authors that are putting in their time and knowledge in these workshops. We really appreciate it. Everything, all the industries are upturned right now. And so we're all working together to really figure out what things will look like in the coming months and the coming years. So yeah, it's just really wonderful seeing all this generative work happening, and thank you so much for your time.
All right, good night, everybody. Thank you, Daniel, so much. Bye, everybody.
You're welcome.